Hey, what's up? It's Mike Gobby with Mike Gobby's Headbangers. And on the line, how are you, Facebook friends? We're super, and we being Madd Maxx Hammer. Yes, that guy, the one and only. We are great, and social distancing, we're doing that, right, Madd Maxx? You're in Tennessee. I'm in Tucson.
Yep, that is over probably 2,000 miles.
That's far enough. So, just a quick backstory. I recently connected with you, within the past day or so on Facebook, and of course I knew your name from the Z-Rock days back in the day, and I had to hit you up and said, this is the one and only Madd Maxx Hammer, I presume, Madd Maxx Hammer, I presume, and you said the one and only.
The one and only.
That's right. Well, let's start with that. Where did that name come from? Because I'm not a huge fan of a lot of DJ handles, names, nicknames, or whatever, you know what I mean? But that one I always liked.
Well, I was in Bakersfield, California, working at a radio station, KKXX, and I used the name Dave Camper, and I moved to Dallas when the offer came for Z-Rock, and the station was not on the air at that point. We were like the initial sign-on jocks, the DJs that were hired for that, and we all congregated at a hotel in Dallas, and one night we were sitting by the pool. It was in the summertime, late summer, and the program director was Wild Bill Scott, and he goes, dude, we cannot use Dave Camper on the air. That's just too normal. So he goes, what nationality are you? And I said, German. And he goes, okay, we're going to use Hammer. How about Max Hammer? And then that's how it came about, just sitting by the pool, sipping on our drinks. And it was just a great time for one and all at the beginning of Z-Rock. When I say sipping on our drinks, lemonade and water.
Like, seriously?
Yeah.
So there was no alcohol-induced aspirations of these?
No, because we were signing on, a new radio station, so we had to, kind of keep that focus, if you will. It was, and heavy metal hadn't really taken to commercial radio. It was on college radios and specialty programs on commercial radio. You might get an hour or two on the weekend, but as a full-time 24/7 365 radio format, heavy metal had not really been tested. It was being done in Long Beach, California, but that's an isolated market. Z-Rock was a network with the capability of being heard all over the United States, so it was a whole new thing. So again, we wanted to maintain that focus, so we weren't, we didn't party at all, actually.
Well, let's start. We'll get back to Z-Rock in a second. How did you break into radio? I think you told me you've been in it since 75. I'm late to the game. I got into it in 2001, but yet have had a 31-year DJ career as like a nightclub DJ, strip club DJ, and then finally breaking into radio. So now I've got about 15 years under my belt. Only 2 stations, which I think is pretty good. But how did you break into it?
Well, just, I was out of high school and going, from job to job, trying to figure out, what am I going to do now that I'm out of school? Because I wasn't into school, so I didn't go to college. And I was sitting at home one day watching TV, and a TV commercial came on for the Columbia School of Broadcasting. And I was living in Thousand Oaks, California at the time, and Columbia was in Hollywood, right down there at Sunset and Vine. And I went down there and gave them about, I think it was $900 to do the course, and you could get out of the course the least amount of time it would take. A student would be like 6 to 7 months. If you weren't out of there in 24 months, then you just lost your money and you wasted your time. But I got out of there in 10 months and got a job. They had a job placement deal at the school once you graduated, and they pointed me in the direction of an opening, and I called the station. It was in Bishop, California, about 6 hours north of where I was living in Thousand Oaks. And I went up there, applied, got the job, and just kept going in radio from that point on in 1975. And I never was without a job. And the last music radio job I had was 1986 to 1993 at Z-Rock.
Wow. So, man, way back in the day, we were talking off the phone about cutting tape for your production or doing whatever, using the razor blade and the tape, splicing together the tape. And you obviously used turntables and carts exclusively.
Exactly.
And maybe a little bit of reel-to-reel even. But, oh, my God, dude.
To record telephone calls.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then you cut that up and everything. Oh, my God. So I lucked out on the one hand. But I guess some people see it as the cheater's way to get into radio is, well, you didn't work with carts and you didn't cut tape. I got in on the digital age. But I'm still really proud of the fact that I got into it without having gone to broadcasting school. Because way back in the day, I mean, as a kid, I'd wanted to be a DJ. I wanted to be on the radio. I thought it was so cool. And, Radio Shack sold that little thing you put together and you could broadcast within your home on an AM blank station or whatever, and it barely worked, but I thought that was the coolest thing. So long story short, having been a DJ around Tucson, I got to know a program director who knew how I was kind of as a personality and everything, and he was the one that got me my first job in radio at 96.1 KLPX, which is ironically back where I'm at, and his name is Jonas Hunter, so I owe him my career.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I can relate because when I was a kid, I used to listen. I grew up in, again, Thousand Oaks, California, and we picked up all the L.A. radio stations because we were only 20, 30 miles from L.A. in Thousand Oaks, and I used to listen to 93 KHJ with Charlie Tuna and Machine Gun Kelly, listen to KRLA, listen to KMPC, Gary Owens, and KMET, KLOS, K-West, Jim Ladd on KMET, B. Mitchell Reed on 95.5 KLOS, and, Fred Gallardo on KWST 106 in L.A., and KROQ, can't forget KROQ AM 1500 and 106.7 FM. And, I mean, Jimmy Kimmel and the insane Daryl Wayne, and just a lot of great names came out of KROQ. And Rick Carroll was the program director. He's deceased now, but he was the one that got that radio station on the air and brought in Rodney Bingham-Heimer, the mayor of the Sunset Strip. And, this L.A. radio was just so great, and I just would listen to it all, while I was growing up and said, I got to be a DJ. That's exactly how I started.
That's a lot of great history right there. Did you happen to know a Trip Reeb? I think his last name was? Yeah,
I remember Trip Reeb. He was in San Antonio, and he was actually hired, if I'm not mistaken. Trip was actually, I can't remember the station in San Antonio that he programmed, but he was going to be the initial program director of Z-Rock. Then he ended up backing out and not doing it because Wild Bill Scott was hired to be the music director, but Trip never showed up to be the PD, the program director. So Wild Bill stepped in, and then they let me step into Wild Bill's shoes. So at the outset of Z-Rock, Wild Bill ended up the program director, and I ended up being the music director, and we also had on-air shifts.
What a trip. Pun intended, because
yeah,
Trip,
exactly.
I met
exactly.
him. So he ended up with Hubbard, and I guess he was also responsible for the Flip to Alternative out in L.A. What's the big station out there? I think you mentioned it.
KROQ?
That might.
KROQ?
Yeah, and when they flipped to Alternative, right?
Yeah.
At one point, I believe he was the one responsible for that. Yeah, I think so, because, let's see, KMET was out there, right?
Yeah.
And then KNAC. KNAC is...
KLOS.
KLOS. Yeah, you named all those. Well, anyway, so when I got back into radio, so I was at 96.1 KLPX down here in Tucson for about almost 4 years. I got from part-time to the overnights, and then I got fired. Part of the reason I called Billy Squire pole smoker, and apparently I wasn't supposed to do that. So anyway, lesson learned. I get hired up in Phoenix at 93.3 KDKB, really cool heritage rocker, and finally ended up doing, I did part-time, went to full-time afternoons, and then nights, and that's where I ended up. And Sandusky was the company at the time. They got bought by Hubbard, and Trip was like the regional manager or whatever. So that's how I knew him. When they bought Sandusky, they came in and took over. They didn't make any changes for a year, but almost exactly a year later, all of a sudden, here came the flip to New Alternative, and we were all fired, 9 of us, on airs.
Wow.
Yeah. But the good thing out of that, and this is going to lead into Z-Rock, was, okay, so when I first tuned into Z-Rock, because like 96.1 KLPX, and we used to be able to get KUPD, 98 KUPD out of Phoenix, which was a really cool station as well. Those were my 2 go-to stations down here in Tucson. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Z-Rock comes along. It's like, oh my God, this is like a dream come true, you know? And that would be the station I would want to do if I could ever.
What year was this?
I think when we first had it here in Tucson, I would say probably 87. I think 87 or 88 for sure.
In Tucson.
Yeah, we were getting the signal here in Tucson.
Wow. Yeah, we're probably getting it from the Phoenix station. So that would have been probably more around 1990 and beyond. If you were getting the signal out of Phoenix, then it would have been about 1990 and beyond, as I said.
There was no way we were getting the Dallas signal?
Not in Tucson.
Huh.
No. The signal would never go that far.
Well,
because we were on FM in Dallas. I mean, we were on AM in some markets where you might have been able to pick up do you remember if you were picking the Z-Rock up on AM or FM?
If I remember correctly, it was FM.
Yeah, then you must have been getting it out of Phoenix.
And were you guys syndicated, or?
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if somebody here, you're not aware of anybody in Tucson that was doing that back in the late 80s?
We might have, and if it was, I just don't remember. It was so long ago.
Right, that's where I'm at. I'm thinking it was then, but I could be totally wrong. I just know it was here at one point.
Okay, yeah. Then,
I loved it.
Then it must have been there, but I just can't remember being on in Tucson. You know, but that doesn't mean we weren't. You know, again, we were on so many markets that it was really hard to keep track of them. And a lot of the markets we were on, they would dump out of the network and put on a local program, like say maybe in the afternoon or the morning drive, and they wanted to be more local oriented because we were a network coming out of Dallas, broadcasting out of Dallas to the local market, and some of the markets wanted to be, you know, hitting the locals. So in the afternoon, the prime radio spot or the morning, they would go local. So again, they could cater more to the local audience and not sound, you know, generic network.
Well, yeah, my memory is not. The older we get, oh my God, the more we forget, obviously. So again, the timeline, but I swear to God, it was in the late 80s around then. Because I'll tell you one thing that threw me off, and you're going to laugh at this. You know, I used to hear, I learned of some new bands listening to Z-Rock. And one was a band that I thought was RATT, because the song was Take You to the Limit, or Take It to the Limit. And I thought for sure, man, that's Stephen Pearcy, that's the new RATT. And I could not find it anywhere. And it turned out it was a Christian band called White Cross.
Wow.
I don't know if you remember that.
Oh yeah, I remember White Cross, but I don't remember that specific song. But sure, yeah, I remember them. We played anything that had, I mean, between 1986 and 1988, when me and Wild Bill ran the show, we played anything that had a good lead guitar solo in it.
Right.
After 1988, when Lee Abrams took over and Wild Bill left, it became more generic heavy metal, and it didn't have the edge to it and the crunch. But I'm not saying, you know, one was better than the other. It's just that, you know, one was a little more mainstream, where the other was more, you know, metal. I mean, you know, more of the King Diamond, the Motorhead, the Slayer, Metallica, as opposed to, you know, Motley Crue and that genre of heavy metal. But we still played, you know, heavier metal like Metallica in the latter part of Z-Rock, beyond 1988. It's just that, you know, you weren't getting up in the morning anymore and hearing Slayer at 7 a.m. or Merciful Fate at 8:30 a.m.
Yeah. Okay, so I had to look it up, but the RATT album that I thought that song would have been on was in 1988, the Reach to the Sky album, or Reach for the Sky album. So you guys were definitely being broadcast at that time here in Tucson. However it was, I don't remember, to be honest with you. But
okay,
anyway,
yeah, you're probably right. I just forgot.
Right.
We were on in Cleveland, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Dallas, and Chicago, and that's pretty much what I can remember off the top of my head. The rest, Tucson. Yeah, if you say we were, then we were.
There you go. Yeah, we'll just make it easy. Let me see. Let's see. Ooh, you know what? It might have been AM. I'm looking on.
It might have been that. You're right. Then it would have been beyond 1988 because that's when they started the AM thing. And the Z-Rock wasn't made for AM. It's an FM format, but they weren't getting the affiliates that they wanted, so they said, what can we do? Well, let's try AM. So they tried it on AM. We'd got a lot of AMs, too, so actually it kind of worked better on AM than FM. But, I mean, technically and sound-wise in your car or home, you're going to want to hear it on FM.
Right.
But people still listened because it was unique and nobody else was doing it, and the metalheads didn't care if it was AM or FM. They were hearing their favorite song, and I would have done the same thing. I used to listen to KROQ on AM 1500. I just loved the edge heavy music, and I would tune in. But, I mean, KROQ AM 1500 1973 is the first time I ever heard the New York Dolls. And nobody ever plays the New York Dolls on the radio, but KROQ AM 1500 did in the middle of the afternoon, and I freaked out on that, and I've been a Dolls fan ever since.
Well, according to Wikipedia, and of course you take a lot of it with a grain of salt, but it says here Tucson, it was an AM station, 88 and 89.
Wow, that's a good frequency.
So, okay, back to that being a dream job of mine, that's where my whole Mike Obby's Headbangers came from was, the idea of Z-Rock, but up in Phoenix, kind of doing also, to be honest with you, kind of what Eddie Trunk was doing, also D. Snyder of House of Hair, but put my own spin on it and have it be a local personality doing it. So I got Headbangers Heaven, which was a 5-hour show from 7 to midnight on Saturdays. And then when I got the full-time overnights, at one point we brought it back and just called it Headbangers at 11 because it came on at 11. We had the mandatory Metallica, of course, like everybody did. We did that at 10 o'clock. And at 11, we had Headbangers at 11. And the reason why we had to change the name was because somebody from Z-Rock, and I cannot find the email, I can't figure out who it was, sent us a cease and desist letter about using Headbangers Heaven. So we're like, okay, wow. Screw it. We won't use it.
That must have been, I don't remember when that Headbangers Heaven was on Z-Rock. I just can't remember that.
Well, all I could dig up was there was somebody that did have claim to the domain or whatever, you know what I mean? But they hadn't done anything with it in forever. So to send out a letter like that, on the one hand, it was kind of crappy, but I guess on the other hand, they had every right to. But regardless, so I finally kind of got my dream job, but for a while it was only 5 hours once a week, and it became 1 hour 5 times a week. But now, Z-Rock, just from the very beginning, we kind of touched on that. How did this formulate? Who came up with this idea? Like, okay, we're going to play hard rock and metal 24/7.
Well, it was a brainchild of Robert Hall, who worked at the Satellite Music Network in Dallas, and it was network radio, and the Satellite Music Network had different radio formats. You had a soul format, a top 40 format, you had an easy listening format, and kind of like a music of your life format. Music of your life would be like hearing Montavani, and you'd hear Barbra Streisand and Frank Sinatra, just different radio formats. And I guess KNAC in Los Angeles was doing heavy metal, and it was getting a pretty good response. So I'm not saying they they did it as a result of KNAC, but they, I guess, did their due diligence and figured out, hey, let's try something different. And they did. And that's how, Z-Rock came about. I read about it in a radio industry magazine called Radio and Records. Again,
oh, yeah.
A.K.A. R&R. Used to call it R&R.
Wow, yeah, that big-ass magazine that came out.
Yeah, and I found out about the Satellite Music Network kicking off this heavy metal format. My whole goal in radio was to play heavy metal on the radio. So I immediately applied for the job. However, they never did listen to my tape or read my resume, which I snail mailed them back in 1986. I was on the air at KKXX Bakersfield one afternoon. I did afternoons. Buck Owens, the country star, owned the radio station there in Bakersfield, and I was working afternoon drive, and the hotline rang, and it was Robert Hall, and he offered me the job at Z-Rock. And I go, how did you hear about me? I sent you a tape and resume. Did you listen to it? He goes, no, I didn't even know you sent me a tape and resume. He goes, a dude named Mike Bone, who works for Elektra Records in New York City, gets your newsletter, because at that time I was sending out a newsletter to industry people. It was called Heavy Metal Radio, and I had a top 40. It was called instead of top 40, I called it the Tough 40, and I would list 40 heavy metal tunes that were popular at that point, and I sent it out to radio people, and people, responded to it. Again, because there was no format of heavy metal on the radio at that time, so people were noticing it. But anyway, Mike Bone, I guess Robert Hall called Mike Bone at Elektra in New York and goes, we're having trouble filling the air personalities on this heavy metal format we're kicking off. Do you know any DJs? And he had my newsletter and said, hey, I know this dude named Dave Camper in Bakersfield. So Robert Hall called me and offered me the gig, and I was off from Bakersfield to Dallas, and it was a dream come true.
Yeah, absolutely. So to be right there at the very start, it's kind of weird. On the flip side of that, I was at the very end of a heritage rocker, the 93.3 KDKB, as it was years. I'd been there 8 years, and my shift, one of my shifts was, or my 7 to midnight shift was, I think, the last live shift before the next day, and then when they fired us all. Oh, and here's something else that's kind of interesting. We talked earlier on the phone, and we mentioned a mutual friend, Tommy Victor of Prong. So the Saturday before, let's see, I think it was September 17th of, was it 2014? Now I don't even remember all this. But anyway, my birthday party, which featured Prong and some other Phoenix bands, that was the last official KDKB event ever as a rock station.
Wow.
So I got that.
Yeah, Tommy Victor's a cool guy.
Oh, I love Prong. I just texted him because I got the 0 Days CD, and I've been jamming it in the car, and I can't get off of it. Well, I finally did, but I listened to it probably about 4 times, and I really got stuck on Interbeing, track 6. So if anybody out there wants to hear a kick-ass Prong tune and you're not familiar with Prong, check that out on 0 Days, and I'll bet you'll dig pretty much everything else they do as well.
Well, you're listening to Madd Maxx Hammer with Mike Gotti here, and we're continuing to talk about Days Gone By.
That's right. But you got to put a B in there. It's Gobby, not Gotti.
Oh, McGobby. Sorry about that.
We'll leave that in there. I won't edit that. But that's all right. That's the thing about my name, dude. I mean, Gene Simmons screwed it up. I always tell the tale of Gene Simmons screwing it up, because if you see it, you can't say it, and if you hear it, you can't spell it. So I had him do a liner read for the Headbangers show. Hello, this is Gene Simmons, and you're listening to, and I had it spelled phonetically, and even then he couldn't get it right. So after the third time, he stops and he goes, have you had this name your entire life? And I'm like, yeah. You've never thought about changing it? And I'm like, no. And he goes, well, then you should expect a few hiccups.
There you go.
And I thought, hey, you know what? I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to put it.
So,
and
go ahead.
From a guy like Gene Simmons, you gotta love it.
Yeah. He wasn't a dick like a lot of people say, but you could tell he's very pompous and stuff. But he was cool for what he was doing at the time. He made an in-store appearance at a guitar shop back when he was selling those Axe basses for like $5,000, and just to meet him and get it signed, he had to buy one, right? So a local store up there had him there, and me being a part of the radio station, we went down there and pimped it out. And but he was cool.
Yeah, Kiss has always been a great band. I mean, I bought their first album when it hit the stands back in 1974. I'll never forget it, coming home and putting it on and just being blown away. I just did not expect it to be that heavy for the time, 1974. Right.
Well, I'll tell you, man.
Kiss is great.
You've got what is it? 14 years on me, right? You told me you're 65.
Correct.
And I'm 51, so you've got all those years ahead of me, where you were right there when it happened. You know, to be the first, or to be one of the first to pick up a brand new album like that. That's got to be really cool.
Yeah, it was. I've always been into discovering, new artists and new music, and even before I got into radio. So it was just kind of like, it's one of those things that you're built for. Like, some guy ends up being a pro football player, and that's all he did when he grew up was played football, and that's all I did was get into music and listen to radio. And I remember getting Ted Nugent and the Amboy Dukes, and nobody had ever heard of them. And,
right.
And then Ted Nugent became big, and then I remember, when I was in radio as a music director at KKXX, Motley Crue and RATT were just coming out, and nobody would play them. However, Atlantic Records, RATT, or Elektra Records, Motley Crue, and Atlantic Records, RATT, released singles of Motley Crue and RATT's first album, and I was a music director, and added Round and Round by RATT and Looks to Kill by Motley Crue when nobody else would add it on their radio station, and we played it on KKXX Bakersfield. Looks to Kill by Motley Crue and Round by RATT, and We're Not Gonna Take It by Twisted Sister. And these bands gave me platinum records for going out on the edge and playing their song before they were platinum record bands. And it was just a great thing to be able to have an opportunity to present music like that to the public for the first time.
Well, the fact that, thank you for having the balls to do stuff like that. And number two, how cool is that to break an artist, right? And then for them to thank you that way, what a great memory, man. I mean, how cool was that as it happened? I can only imagine.
I did the same thing with Guns N' Roses, and I moved to Dallas for Z-Rock 1986, and one night before my air shift, I stopped at the Galleria, which was a mall there, and went into a record store and found, actually it was the Valley View Mall right off 635 Freeway in Dallas, a record store, not in the Galleria, sorry about that. But anyway, I found Live Like a Suicide by Guns N' Roses. Appetite for Destruction hadn't come out yet, so I took it into my show and played it on the air that night, Live Like a Suicide. And I was like, from that moment, they said I was the first to play it on the radio, which I'm sure I wasn't. I'm sure KNAC was, but anyway, I got a platinum record from Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction for being, as they said, the first to play Guns N' Roses on commercial radio. So that was pretty exciting too. Absolutely.
I mean, it's funny. I got to tell you right now, me being a radio personality, talking to a radio personality that I enjoyed way back in the day is pretty exciting. I had to let you know that, by the way. I mean, this is really cool, man. I'm glad we hooked up. And, again, Z-Rock was really special to a lot of people because I came across, somebody linked me to a Facebook page, 100.3 KZRX Phoenix, Arizona, a tribute page. And, oh, my God, dude, there's an air check of you on there. And you were good on the air, man. You weren't puking, and you just sounded good, and you were funny, and, your little drops, and, who can forget? In fact, I got to tell you, on Saturday Night Loud, on Saturday nights we have Dee Snider's House of Hair, and then it goes into Saturday Night Loud, which is a local 3-hour show hosted by the Mullet, who literally has the most awesome mullet you'll ever see. Finally coiffed, and will never go away because you just can't get rid of it. But they use the House of a Thousand Eyes or whatever that EZO riff is. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They stole it from you.
Well, I appreciate, what you just said, and, I would like to hear that air check because I was wondering, I lost that air check.
Oh,
really? I'm wondering if it's the same one I lost. But I remember that. I was only on that station from the that was a local affiliate for Z-Rock, and they would dump out a Z-Rock and put on a local, go local, and I was on at night locally at that KZRX, and I was only on there about a week or two, and I left there and went to KEGL Dallas, where I worked for about a year or two from 93 to 94 or 5. But that gig at KZRX, which lasted, again, just maybe a month, was a great time because I just did free form radio because I just, didn't care to go by the format. So I just played what I wanted. And I used to have JJ, the guitar player from Fight, come on the show, and he would bring his personal music collection, and we would play it. It was great, and I never got in trouble for just blowing off the format and going free form. And again, JJ had this, great, incredible collection of music, and we just had a great time when he would come up on the show. And even when he didn't, I'd just sit there and play, Testament, Slayer, Megadeth, Pantera, and just segue him and go Z-Rock and just let the music do the talking. It was a great time.
Well, I'll definitely link you because I just saw you liked a picture that I came across of you and the Tiptonizer.
Right. Jason Tipton, he used to work at the network in Dallas.
Now, okay, so obviously your name was one of the DJs I absolutely remembered, and I can remember seeing your name in thank yous of all these heavy metal records. And how cool is that? That's happened to me a couple times in my career, but I mean, I don't think that ever gets old, does it? To even now look back and open up a record and there's your name, thanks to. But so it was you. I remember Booby Bondage. Okay.
Right. That was Wild Bill's girlfriend. He was working as a DJ at KNAC, and they offered him and Sam Freeze, two KNAC DJs, a job at Z-Rock, and Sam Freeze, the Freeze disease, and Wild Bill Scott came out to Dallas for the sign-on of Z-Rock, and Wild Bill brought his girlfriend, Booby Bondage, and she ended up getting on the air at Z-Rock, and the rest is history as far as she's concerned. She was everybody's fantasy. That was a male anyway.
Well, I was
or maybe
ask,
even beyond male.
Was it a case of not the face for radio? Was she really hot?
Not really, but her moniker fit. It's just, she was just, she was a metal. She wasn't really a metal chick, but she looked like a metal chick, and she looked like she was rode hard and put away wet.
Nice. All right, so name some other DJs around that time, the ones I would have heard, because I cannot think of them.
Rockin' Randy Davis. He was a Dallas DJ, and we needed somebody, and he came up looking for a job, and Wild Bill lassoed him in, and he was just fit the format perfectly. Rockin' Randy Davis was your typical AOR DJ, AOR standing for album-oriented rock,
right.
And he just had that Jim Ladd approach, just real, just like he had just smoked a doobie before he got on the air, one of those kind of deliveries.
Yeah.
But he did the morning show, and he did a great job. And then at the beginning, there was a dude named Killer Kilpatrick, and Killer Kilpatrick, a very unique guy, but he was one of those radio guys that he was just a vagabond. He would just go from station to station, and his lifespan at each station be like just a matter of months. So
wow.
He didn't last long.
Right.
And another original that didn't last was Sam Freeze, who again came over. He was a KNAC DJ, and he left KNAC to come to Z-Rock, and he did not last at all. He ended up getting there and ripping everybody off with some money. So I'm going to go back because he came from L.A., Long Beach, to Z-Rock in Dallas, and he said to all the DJs at Z-Rock, I'm going to go back to L.A. for a weekend and give me some money and I'll buy you some souvenirs. And so everybody gave him money, but he never came back. He just went AWOL. It was unbelievable.
Oh, man.
So, there was a lot of DJs shuffling at the beginning of Z-Rock, but it finally settled down with Rockin' Randy Davis in the morning. I think Booby Bondage did middays. Wild Bill did afternoons. and then I did the night shift, and then like Tracy Barnes did the all night shift.
Tracy Barnes, I know that name.
Yeah, he worked for Trip Reeb in San Antonio, and then and then after Wild Bill left, Lee Abrams came in to manage, and he picked Tracy Barnes to be the successor as program director to Wild Bill. And Tracy lasted maybe through '89, and then a dude named Pat Dawsey jumped in there around 1990 as program director. And Pat Dawsey programmed Z-Rock from probably 1990 to the end of Z-Rock in 1997 when they went belly up. I mean, heavy metal just didn't last as long as people wanted it to, but it had a good run, you know. Z-Rock had a good run, 86 to 97. That's a good, 10, 11 years.
Well, the fact that, grunge came along when it did, and to last into and through that's a testament to the people out there that still enjoyed the format, which, it's so funny. Once I posted that I was going to be talking to you, I mean, I think we're up to almost 100 people that have commented or liked that post because so many people do remember and love Z-Rock so much.
That's because of the uniqueness of it. Nobody was playing Slayer at 7 o'clock in the morning as a standard in your format. Merciful Fate at 10 in the morning. Come on, these are songs and groups that, for the most part, if they were to be played on commercial radio, they would be called day-parted groups or songs, meaning they're only able to be played in a certain part of the day, and that's usually late at night. They parted for late at night only, Bon Jovi you'll hear in the morning, and Poison and Crew, but Merciful Fate and Slayer and Pantera, they're day parted for night, except not on the original Z-Rock from 1986 to 1988. Those first 2 years, you're going to hear anything at any time. We just went, as they call it, balls out.
Yeah. Well, that's so awesome, man. All right, you just mentioned Pantera. Let's talk about them for a couple different reasons. Now, I'm one of the Pantera fans that was into Pantera with Projects in the Jungle.
Right.
And then went backwards from there with, what was it? Let's see, I Am the Night, Metal Magic, Projects in the Jungle. And then when Power Metal came out, I really dug that because, Phil brought a little different something to the band, but I really enjoyed Power Metal. And I can remember you guys doing a live broadcast out of the basement, I guess, right? Out of Dallas.
Probably.
Yeah, there was a Pantera live broadcast for that tour.
Okay.
And it's out there. I found it finally, but I can remember listening to it as it happened. And then, we'll get to some other segments too that I remember, but you have a personal tie-in with Pantera, don't you?
Well, yeah, me and Phil were, good friends, just, outside of radio and all that. But Z-Rock came on the air in 1986, and we signed on again as a network. We were based in Dallas, but we were not heard in Dallas. We were heard in Chicago, Cleveland, and Grand Rapids at that point, and Jackson, Mississippi, over satellite. We would broadcast our signal off satellite in space, and then local markets that subscribed to our format could pull that Z-Rock format off the satellite into their local station. And we didn't have a local Dallas station until 1987 that pulled the signal off satellite. And that station in Dallas broadcast all over the Metroplex, from Fort Worth, Arlington, into Dallas, Garland, etc., Arlington. And the guys in Pantera heard the format and had just recorded the Power Metal demo. And one day on my show, I was working afternoons at this point, I think, and or substituting in the afternoon, and all of a sudden somebody burst through my the door into the studio during my show, and it was Dimebag Darrell, Rex, and Vinnie Paul, and they had the demo on cassette, and they asked me to listen to it. So I listened to it, brought it to Wild Bill. We decided to play it, and then they really appreciated that. So when they pressed Power Metal into an album, that's probably where you were seeing all the special thanks to Booby Bondage and everything in Z-Rock, because they really appreciated us. And gave us the big thanks on that power metal album. And after we were on a year, we had a year anniversary for Z-Rock, and Pantera played the live show at the Arcadia in Lower Greenville in Dallas. And it was a great time for one and all. And through all that, that's right when Phil joined Pantera, and he was, an unknown at that point, and he made it with that power metal album. And then they finally got signed to Atlantic, and then they started touring and becoming more popular. And then they got, Vulgar Display of Power and Far Beyond Driven, and that's when they really hit their stride and became an international band. And at that point, we're hitting, 93 and 94, and I'm out of Z-Rock at that point, working at the Eagle, and I quit the Eagle to go on tour with Pantera because Phil asked me if I would go on tour with him and just travel with him, quit my job at the Eagle, and be his assistant. And that entailed many different hats. So I took that job, and it was a great job, and got to go around the world with Pantera and Phil, and it was just a great time. And, I knew Dimebag and Rex and Vinny through the radio thing, but I really got to know those guys a lot better when I went on the tour in 94. And then I went back on tour with them in 96. And also I toured their last tour, 2001, or 2000 and 2001. And that 2000 tour, we went to Japan, Europe, through the United States. And 2001, and also the 2000, we did the Ozfest. That was a trip in itself, going through the full Ozfest in a summer. And then in the 2000, that was 2000, and then 2001, the same tour, the Extreme Steel tour, they toured with Slayer, and man, what a month or month and a half touring every night, watching Slayer and Pantera on stage together. Pantera being my second favorite band of all time, Slayer being my favorite band of all time. I mean, I have some great stories I can tell being personal friends with Pantera, but I can also tell some great stories about being personal friends with the guys in Slayer. And again, they're my favorite band of all time. But I will say this, I saw every show that Slayer did with Pantera on that Extreme Steel tour in the summer of 2001. And I will say Pantera outdid Slayer every night of that tour. And Slayer's my favorite band of all time. And I was expecting Slayer, to outdo Pantera. But, every night I'd come in the dressing room before Pantera went on. I go, Phil, Slayer just kicked some rear end out there, man. You're going to be hard pressed. You're going to be really hard pressed to outdo them tonight. And they did every night. I mean, it was unbelievable. And nothing against Slayer. I love them, and they did better than, they're the greatest band of all time in my eyes. But Pantera, I don't know, that for that tour with Slayer, you just saw a different Pantera. They were just unbelievable. And crazily enough, that was the last tour they ever did. In 2001, that was it. No more Pantera after that.
Wow. Well, what great memories, especially looking at what's happened since then. The unfortunate passings of both of the brothers. It's like, man.
Yeah.
Did you happen to attend either of those funerals?
No, I was just incommunicado at that point in life.
Yeah. Well, the fact that you told me you don't have a cell phone, that kind of shows you right there, right?
Exactly.
You're as much off the grid as possible, apparently.
And I don't own a computer either.
Oh my God! So how do you do this? The Facebook thing?
Work.
Okay.
I got a computer at work.
Well, there you go. All right, cool. So some other things, and I have to admit, for my own Headbangers show, I ripped off the Rock Backwards segment. I thought that was so cool, and I used to do that for ticket giveaways. So that's one of the things I remember.
Backwards?
Whatever it was actually called, I called it Rock Backwards or Back Rockwards, whatever the hell we called it.
Yeah, that's what it was, called Back Rockwards.
Okay, yeah, and I thought that was a great segment.
Played the song backwards, and then people would call in and try to guess what the song was.
Right. Yeah, I would do about maybe 20 seconds or so. But
I played the whole thing and recorded all the people that called in and played them all back until somebody got the song right.
Did you ever have a song that nobody got right?
Very rarely, but it did happen. And I had the sound effects ready if that happened, you know, to make it entertaining, because the entertaining part was somebody getting it. You know, that was the whole deal. But if somebody didn't, you know, I was always prepared. But it was rare.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed that, and like I said, I incorporated different, you know, segments from my own show, and that was one of them. Another thing I remember, and it could have been KUPD from Phoenix that I was picking up, but I'm pretty sure it was you guys. Savage Amusement by Scorpions came out in 1988, and if it was you guys, whoever it was, played the entire album.
It was probably us.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm thinking.
You know, we would do that.
Yeah, that's the cool thing you guys did, like these live broadcasts of concerts, you know. I'm trying to think of what else I can't think of who else I heard on there. But, you know, the standouts like the Pantera thing that you broadcast live, and then, you know, the whole album of Scorpions, you know, that's probably my top band ever. You know, one of my favorites for sure. So that was cool that I got to hear that album in its entirety. I think it was before it was released. And then also, having lived in Idaho Falls, Idaho, when Blackout came out, that's when I just fell in love with Scorpions. And they never came around that area. I can't remember them even coming to like Salt Lake City or Boise. So Tucson, Arizona was the first time I ever got to see Scorpions live, and it was on the Savage Amusement tour.
Wow.
So you know how certain things just stick out in your brain? We talk about our memory, but there's certain things that are never going to go away.
Exactly.
And again, that's,
I agree.
You know, it's really cool to see these people coming up on the Facebook post I made. Like one chick I know, Susan McCraren, she said she used to hang with you out in Dallas.
Yeah, I saw that comment.
Did you see that?
Yeah, she said she used to hang out with me at the Basement and Dallas City Limits, and I was a DJ at both of those clubs, and a lot of people would come and hang out with me, and it was just a great time for one and all. You know, the bands that we saw, and just the good times that we had, especially the reminiscing.
Well, not only that, living it at the time. I mean, again, getting into radio when you did, and then being the first, or at the fruition of Z-Rock. I mean, that's just, you've gone down in history. Let's just put it that way, I think. And to a lot of us out there, they would think the same thing.
Yeah, and being a heavy metaler, getting into radio in the 70s and 80s, when Top 40 and AOR were the big formats. And if you want to know what AOR sounded like back then, listen to classic rock radio today, and that's what AOR sounded like back in the day when it was really a popular radio format. And for me, you know, I listened to AOR because it was the only thing there. There was nobody playing full-on heavy metal. And it was just, you know, then in the early 80s when I was working in Top 40 radio, I mean, again, I'm playing Huey Lewis and the News, Madonna, Michael Jackson, you know, bands like that, and Simple Minds. And here I am trying to sneak in Motley Crue, RATT and Twisted Sister. But we did it. And, you know, also Van Halen, they had some good records out in the mid-80s. So it was just a labor of love, really. It was laborious getting the whole thing started. And what I did in the early 80s when I was a music director for a Top 40 station, again in Bakersfield, KKXX, the station owned by Buck Owens, I distributed throughout radio and records a newsletter called Heavy Metal Radio, as I said earlier. And that's what got things going, not for the format itself, but for me. Without that newsletter, I would not have been able to work at Z-Rock. So, you know, it was a lot of self-promotion. So to get where you want to be in radio, you got to do a lot of self-promoting. You know? And it's just, you know what I'm talking about. It's,
yeah, absolutely.
Nobody's going to promote you unless you got a big name and you got an agent. But without that, you're your own agent.
Yep.
And however you market yourself is where you're going to end up in your career. And, you know, everybody in a career like radio, TV, you know, media, they're going to always want to get to the next step up. And that's just the natural agenda of radio, TV, and the media. You want to keep moving forward and keep moving up. You know, like I said, I started in Bishop, California in radio, population 3,200, ended up in Dallas, which is a, you know, top 5 market, radio market in the United States. So again, it's how you market yourself.
Right, and I go through that right now. I always joke about my shameless self-promotion, which a lot of people get pissed off at, but that leads to a tagline on one of my shirts: haters gonna hate. If I don't do it, who else is gonna do it? You know, and I know what it's like to reach the pinnacle of my career was afternoons, major market radio in Phoenix. I mean, and only I got that after, oh my gosh, trying to remember how many years of radio I even had under my belt. Maybe 4 years, 4 or 5.
Yep.
So to get afternoons on a major market, that was just, you know, my dream job.
Yeah, it took me 10 years to get from, you know, small market to major market. 10 years.
Yeah.
1976 or to 1986. But you know, that journey, you know, through the smaller markets of California. I worked Bishop, I worked Lancaster, I worked Palmdale, California, I worked Stockton, California, I worked Bakersfield, California. You know, I worked all those small medium markets in the West Coast, and then here comes Dallas, and you know, there it is. There's the ring that you strive for when you're on the merry-go-round of life.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people are pissed that I got that position because there were a lot of guys out there that had put, you know, 2-3 times the years of experience, et cetera, so forth. And again, I feel pretty lucky to, in a 15-year career, having worked at only 2 stations.
Yeah, that's a minor miracle in life in itself.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a guy at our sister station. So I work for 96.1 KLPX down here, classic rock, the active rock station as it is now, KFMA. There's a guy who has been part-time his entire career because that's all he wants. He has been there, I think, over 15 years.
Wow.
At least.
There's a lot of people like that. Like, for instance, one of the first DJs at Z-Rock, and he only worked weekends. That's all he wanted was weekends. A guy named the Godfather, Joe Anthony. He was, you know, an icon, radio icon in San Antonio, but he came up to Z-Rock and worked weekends, and that's all he wanted. He didn't want to get a full-time gig. He just wanted to work Saturday and Sunday. So, you know, more power to him. You know, it just depends on what your goals are and what you're into.
Yeah. And before I forget his name, I got to drop it. Roger Leone. That's the guy I was talking about. Now, before I forget, let's go back. Tell me your best Pantera story and your best Slayer story, if you can.
You know, Slayer, I was in my apartment in Bakersfield one night looking at a rock magazine and who's playing in Hollywood tonight, and there was a band called Slayer playing there. So I went down to Hollywood. This is like 1983, 84. Slayer had their first album out, Show No Mercy. They were playing at the Roxy on the Sunset Strip. And so me and my friend drove from Bakersfield to Hollywood, which is only about a 40-minute drive, maybe a little longer than that, and saw Slayer play the Roxy. They were on Metal Blade Records at the time, and Brian Slagle, the owner of Metal Blade, he would rent out the Roxy on a Saturday night and have all his bands from Metal Blade Records play a concert there. And Slayer played there. Betsy played there that night. Lizzie Borden played there. Savage Grace, Malice, the band Malice with Jay Reynolds on guitar. Yeah. All these bands, you know, Lizzie Borden, you know, they're all playing there that night. And actually, I saw my sister there, believe it or not. I come from Bakersfield. She still lived in Thousand Oaks, and she was I go, Carol, what are you doing at a Slayer show? You know, my little sister, but, you know, she was a headbanger. But anyway, ran in the family. So, So then, not long after that, Slayer's playing at the Bakersfield Inn. So I went by myself, and I'm walking from the parking lot of the Bakersfield Inn to go inside, and sitting outside is Tom Araya. And I'm going, dude, you know, you're Tom, right? And he goes, yeah. I go, and I told him who I was. I worked at the local radio station, and I said, dude, man, I love your band, and da-da-la-da-la-da-la-da. So he was cool, and he let me hang out with him the whole night. You know, there was nobody there. It was in the basement at the Bakersfield Inn, and there was nobody there except me and my friend. And you know, I'll never forget Kerry King wore a Venom T-shirt and did not say a word the whole night, but he ripped on guitar. But, you know, me and Tom, you know, I made a new friend, and it was the dude in Slayer, and it was great. Well, then that night ended. It was one of the great nights in heavy metal for me, even though there was nobody there. But Slayer was like, I mean, I was right there. You know, I could have shooken hands with every member of the band that night when they were on stage at the Bakersfield Inn. Then a little bit after that, not Slayer, but Law's Rocket played at the Country Club in Reseda, California. So me and my friend drove down from Bakersfield to Reseda. Reseda's in the San Fernando Valley, which is right outside of L.A. And we're at Law's Rocket, me and my friend, and who's in the pit for Law's Rocket but Jeff Hanneman and Tom Araya. So I went down in the pit, and I said, Tom, remember me? And he goes, hey, Dave, what's going on, man? You know, so me and Tom hooked up that night, and it was weird because right after Law's Rocket got off stage, we're all wanting to go backstage and hang out. Well, they let Jeff Hanneman in backstage, but they didn't let Tom Araya in for some crazy reason. So instead of going backstage, I said, Tom, I'm going to hang out with you, because Tom couldn't leave because he was with Jeff. Jeff was the ride for Tom. So Tom, he was stranded. So he just hung out with us. And what we did is we went in my friend's car, and Tom had the demo cassette of the not yet released album Hell Awaits.
Wow.
So we sat in my friend's car and listened to the demo of Hell Awaits while Jeff is partying backstage with Law's Rocket. We were sitting in the parking lot at the Country Club in Reseda checking out the new Slayer album. So it was a great time for one and all. Then right after that's when I got my job in Dallas at at Z-Rock, and I moved to Dallas. And then Dallas, again, one of our first affiliates was Cleveland, Ohio. They sent me to Ohio from Dallas to represent Z-Rock at a concert. Wasp was Slayer opening. So I went to the concert, and there's Slayer. I go, hey, Tom. Tom goes, what are you doing in Cleveland, Dave? I told him, well, I got a gig at Z-Rock and da-da-la. I got my own heavy metal show, and when you're in Dallas, please look me up. You come up on my show, and I'll do an interview with you. Well, after that, I got back from Cleveland, and a couple months went by. Slayer came to Dallas. They came up on my show, and from that moment on, me and Tom just became real good friends, and we stayed in touch. And when I went back to L.A. to visit my parents in Thousand Oaks, me and Tom would meet up in Hollywood, and Tom came out to my apartment in Dallas and stayed with me. Me and Tom went out to Phil's house in Arlington before Pantera had made it. Me and Tom and Phil were sitting in Phil's living room just watching boxing tapes, and it was just great times, with those guys. And then Pantera made it, and again, I told you that story with Phil, and that's how I got in with those guys, is through my radio gig, and got to meet again Slayer and Pantera, and that's those are the highlights of knowing those guys throughout the years.
That's so funny you're mentioning all those metal bands that were out in the Bay Area or L.A., like Law's Rocket, City's Gonna Burn, Annihilation Principle. I love those guys. And, of course,
City's Gonna Burn.
Lizzie Borden, give him the axe. I just saw Lizzie Borden on the Monsters of Rock cruise, and I got to tell you, the band he's got right now, oh, my God. They were amazing, wow. Dude. They probably, no band sucked on that cruise, but they really were so tight, so much energy, and it was amazing. I thought they had one of the best performances. Betsy, Bitch, Be My Slave, of course. Oh my gosh, dude, you're naming all these, Metal Blade artists and stuff. And, I first got wind of Slayer off of Total Destruction. Remember that album?
No, I'm not
From
aware
Metal
of
Blade.
that
It was
one.
a compilation of Metal Blade artists, and Die by the Sword was on there. So that's what got me into Slayer. So then, of course,
I remember Metal Blade used to put out those Metal Massacre albums.
Right. Yeah, there was that too, and I really enjoyed those. That got me into a lot of bands like Overkill,
Metallica.
Metallica was on there. Black and Blue, RATT, and the Metallica song that was on there was with it wasn't
Hit the Lights.
Yeah, with Dave Mustaine and the bass player before Cliff, I believe.
Oh, Ron McGovney.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't get that name. But yeah, dude, that's just, oh man, that's just such cool history for us metalheads, you know?
Yeah, that's going back to the, the formative days.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, City's Gonna Burn, and there was just a lot of those kind of bands. Armored Saint.
Oh, yes.
I remember the first time I saw Metallica was opening for Armored Saint at the Hollywood Palladium.
Wow. Well, I love Armored Saint, and the unfortunate passing of Dave Pritchard, I'll see if you agree with me. When he died, a certain sound went with him, but Armored Saint still sounds great. They're still going at it to this day, and I've recently become kind of friends with Jeff Duncan, one of the guitar players for Armored Saint, and of course he with DC4, his own band, and he just released a solo album, which is pretty cool. But yeah, Armored Saint, dude. March of the Saint, I had all that stuff on vinyl back in the day, but I was unfortunate that I never got to see them live until many years later, if at all,
Well, there were a lot of great bands back then, like Sabotage, and they had one of their members died unexpectedly.
Right, that's another perfect example of, again, when Chris Oliva died, a sound that he had in his fingers, the way he played guitar, that went with him, It just did.
Exactly.
But, oh, God, that old Sabotage I absolutely love. Oh, that brings up another story of Z-Rock. I remember you guys playing 2 live tracks back-to-back. It was Power of the Night right into Unusual. And I thought that was so cool because, we never got to hear live stuff like that.
Yeah.
So again, Z-Rock being the on the forefront of us for us metalheads and hard rockers, it was great.
Yep, definitely. Having a relationship with Motorhead, and that was one of the great bands of all time.
Oh, absolutely.
Crossing over any format. It's not just a greatest heavy metal band of all time, but having Motorhead, being friends with them, and Lemmy was just a great character, and there was just a lot of those great bands back then. Megadeth came up on my show, and it was just a great time. It was just unbelievable. I even had, I had Vince Neil up on the show, and Ricky Rocket and C.C. DeVille, Iggy Pop, Skid Row, Warrant. Warrant would have to be the most memorable interview that ever came on my show, along with Skid Row.
Ooh,
they were crazy, but they were great interviews, and Warrant was the most memorable band. You wouldn't think with a heavy metal station, Warrant, but Warrant was a great band. They're great guys, and it was just, I just will always remember Warrant. Joey Allen, Janie Lane, they were just great guys. And that was at the time when Warrant was on tour with Trickster and Firehouse.
Oh,
which
yeah.
was a tour that was running through sheds across the nation, those outdoor arenas, and the Starplex Amphitheater in Dallas. But, yeah, those are just great times. And, I just, speaking of the guys that have passed away over the recent years, Janie Lane, it's a bummer he passed away, but he's a great guy. There's no greater guy than Janie Lane.
Well, that was a damn shame. I saw him because for a while he was filling in for on vocals for Great White, and we had a show up in Phoenix, probably about, 6 to 8 months before he died, or, somewhere near the time he died, but he was filling in on vocals with Great White, and we had Great White, Keel, and Queensryche at a show.
Wow,
what
a
show. Yeah, and I was working for KDKB at the time, and so, I went and talked to Janie really quick, but he was being sociable. He was at the merch booth, and he looked very healthy and happy. He sounded great, and then, he unfortunately gave in to his demons, and I had a good conversation with Joey Allen not too long ago, and we talked about how, they tried to do everything for him, And when it comes to addiction, it's a really tough thing because the person that's going through it, first of all, every individual is going to be different. I personally went through a bad bout of alcohol and became sober, so I beat it. There are other people that don't, and unfortunately, Janie Lane didn't. And what a tragic loss, because he was such a great talent.
And there's a lot of people you could equate to that, like Kevin Dubrow. Remember Kevin Dubrow?
Oh, absolutely. Never became friends with him, but yeah, Quiet Riot and his band Dubrow way back in the day. But yeah,
Yeah, but I remember, Keel was, Ron Keel was a great singer, and before Keel, he had his own band called Steeler,
right?
And that's where Yngwie Malmsteen surfaced in the United States, was with Steeler, and Rick Fox from London was the bass player, but Steeler again morphed into Keel, and they got Yngwie had left and gone solo, and then they got the guitar. I wish I could remember the guitar player's name that went to Keel. He backed Pantera.
Oh, Mark Ferrari.
What was it?
Mark Ferrari, correct?
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
And then another guy that took over in Steeler for a bit was Mitch Perry, wasn't it?
Probably. I wasn't aware of that, but I've heard that name definitely.
Okay. Well, Talus, Heaven.
Right. Okay. Exactly.
He's with The Sweet right now. Played with a bunch of other people too. But anyway, yeah. So Keel becoming Keel. I've become friends with Ron Keel. I don't really know the other guys other than Dwayne Miller, who's a very good friend of mine on drums. But they're all great guys, and they still sound great.
So you know Ron Keel?
Not really well, but yeah. Dwayne's my guy up in Phoenix. I met him up there, and we became pretty close friends. But over the years, I've gotten to know Ron, just saw Keel and him. In fact, he stopped me and interviewed me on the Monsters of Rock cruise.
Wow.
Such a cool guy. Such a cool guy.
Yeah. I mean, those were great times for one and all. And it's, kind of interesting to see him still try to, keep the fire burning, if you will.
You know what's funny? I always tell this story. Moving to Tucson was so cool for me as a metalhead because, again, up in Idaho Falls, Idaho, nobody really came there. If we were lucky, somebody like, I saw Dio in Pocatello, which was like 54 miles south at the Mini Dome. So I saw Dio and I saw Loudness and Poison and Van Hagar. But anyway, once I moved to Tucson, that's where I saw a lot of my favorite bands. And I have to admit, Motley Crue and Keel started off the Girls, Girls, Girls tour here, I believe. I was more excited to see Keel than Motley Crue. Are you there? Are you there?
Yeah, sorry, drop the phone.
Oh, okay. So anyway, if you didn't catch what I said, Motley Crue and Keel came to Tucson. And I think they started the Girls, Girls, Girls tour here. I was more excited to see Keel than Motley Crue.
Wow.
Yeah. I love Keel, man.
Yeah, they're a great band. And Steeler was a great band, too. And there was that Hollywood Boulevard Sunset Strip scene back then was just, they were just producing bands like crazy up until Guns N' Roses in the late 80s. RATT and the Crew were, the forerunners in the early 80s. Actually, Van Halen, you could go back that far in the late 70s, but LA just had so many great bands, up to Poison and Guns N' Roses and Warrant, and other bands too. There was just so many bands coming out at that point.
So you mentioned... You mentioned Megadeth. I was going to drop some names here and see if we have mutual friends. I'm sure we do. We just don't know it. So we already figured out we both know Tommy Victor of Prong. You mentioned Megadeth. Are you friends with David Ellefson?
No, I never really met the guys in Megadeth. I did when they came on my show, but, they would probably not remember me. I know Dave Mustaine would remember me during one interview I did. I was working at the Eagle, KEGL Dallas, beyond and past the Z-Rock days, and it was Aerosmith and Megadeth playing at the Starplex Amphitheater in Dallas.
Wow.
And the Eagle asked me to go down to the Starplex and interview Dave Mustaine. So we had our engineer down there. He set everything up, gave me a remote microphone. So I went and found Dave Mustaine. I don't know why they wanted Dave Mustaine when Aerosmith was the headliner.
Right.
And, why not get Aerosmith? But I got Dave Mustaine. He was cool. But then he felt he just didn't feel right because he was opening for Aerosmith. This is 1993, 1994. And so Mustaine, during the interview, started ragging on Aerosmith, calling them a bunch of old fuddy-duddies, and they ought to be out there in wheelchairs, and I can't believe my band Megadeth is opening for Aerosmith, a band that's over the hill, just really getting down on them. And this is going out live on the air. And we were in his dressing room, and people from the Aerosmith camp were listening to the show on the KEGL, and we're going, oh no, this is out of control here. And Mustaine even threw a couple F-bombs on the air.
Nice.
And it was crazy. And the next day it made the news, actually. But the guys in Aerosmith heard it and kicked Megadeth off the tour based on that interview.
Oh my gosh.
Jackal ended up getting the gig.
Oh,
and
wow.
Dave Mustaine talks about that interview in his autobiography.
Well,
So
I've become friends with Dave.
Kind of interesting.
That's awesome. I love it. I'm going to have to ask David Ellefson. I've become friends with him since when he was out of Megadeth. He had a band called F5, and he played a birthday party for me in Tucson. We became friends, so I've been friends with him ever since. And speaking of books, he's written two, and I'm one of the people that got thanked in both of them. So again, going back to get those thank yous, it's so freaking cool, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll have to ask him about that. That's fun.
Yeah, ask Dave Ellefson about that. Getting kicked off the Aerosmith tour there in 1993.
Yeah, I don't remember ever hearing about that. So, yes, that was awesome. Thank you. All right, so back in the day.
That was crazy.
Well, okay, let me ask you this. As an interviewer sitting there and it's going out live and there's nothing you can do about it, how uncomfortable were you?
Yeah, I was really uncomfortable. The main reason was I'm a proven veteran at this point.
Right.
And, I let Dave Mustaine take my microphone and just, ramble on, and I just didn't really take control of that moment.
Yeah.
Even though it was very, very unique, and it might have been cool for a heavy metal station because we were playing pretty good heavy metal on the Eagle at that point. But, I just really wasn't happy with the result of that. But, it happened, and, what can you do at this point?
Now, who else did you break on the airwaves when Z-Rock was around? Like, again, I can remember, like, the White Cross story, just hearing stuff I'd never heard before.
One band, Guns N' Roses was one.
Yeah, you mentioned
played
them.
live like a suicide.
Right.
Way before Appetite for Destruction came out. We got the platinum record for it.
Right.
We also broke Dirty Looks.
Aha, there you
them?
go. Absolutely. Cool from the
Henrik
Wire.
Ostergaard. The late Henrik Ostergaard.
Yeah, another great singer that passed. You know what? It was probably on Z-Rock that I first heard them, and then bought the album, and I've been a fan ever since. I've got some of the more obscure CDs that came out because Cool from the Wire and Turn of the Screw, and by the time Turn of the Screw was over, they were kind of done in the public eye anyway, right? Their popularity kind of came and went.
Yeah, Wild Bill Scott. He discovered them. Of course, we were getting all these independently released albums at Z-Rock because we were playing things that no radio station would play, so we were attracting all kinds of different independent record companies.
Oh, I'll bet.
And one of the record companies, I can't remember what the independent record label that Dirty Looks was on, but they sent us the album. Wild Bill would listen to everything. But Wild Bill was responsible for breaking AC/DC back in his old radio DJ days.
Really?
In the 70s. So, and he listened to Dirty Looks and he recognized Henrik Ostergaard as a complete Bon Scott sound-alike. Yeah. And he said, and there was a song in there called Oh Ruby.
Yeah.
And he said, we got to play this song, dude. And I go, yeah, let's play it. Because I was the music director, so the music director and the PD, program director, always agree on, playing a song. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And, the rest is history. They ended up, as a result of being on Z-Rock and the response they got from that independent record and the song "Oh Ruby," that they got a deal with Atlantic Records, a legitimate deal with Atlantic Records, and they credited us for their rise to what they would consider the top.
Well, there you go.
Getting a major label deal.
Right. Well, no, that's awesome. That's great.
And Pantera too. We broke Pantera by playing power metal. Practically every song on that album we played on Z-Rock, and they got a deal with Atlantic Records. I don't know if it was because we played them, but we were a catalyst in that whole equation, if you will.
Well, I remember the big one you guys played the most of. You played power metal, you played "We'll Meet Again," but the big one, and I love it, is "Proud to Be Loud," which of course goes back to KEEL. Yeah,
Phil was, if you want to hear Phil singing, listen to power metal. Not saying he doesn't sing, but Phil has his own unique style.
Right.
And in power metal, he was singing on that album.
Yeah, and that's just it. Again, that's why I had to point out that I was a Pantera fan back when, Terry Glaze was the vocalist, and then Phil came along, and they still hadn't really broken out. It was Cowboys from Hell that, that's everybody thinks of Pantera, especially way back then because the internet wasn't really prevalent or anything in our lives. So they didn't realize there was power metal and Projects in the Jungle and I Am the Night and Metal Magic. They thought Pantera started with Cowboys from Hell.
Yeah, but I still think power metal is a great album.
Oh, I love it.
The song "Hard Ride" is just one of the great songs of all time. And it's, like I say, Phil is just a great singer, and he just morphed into a heavy metal vocalist after that power metal album.
Right.
But Phil is one of the great vocalists of all time metal. I can't think of anybody who can beat Phil in vocals except maybe Tom Araya. I would put them at the top as heavy metal vocalists, as Tom Araya and Phil Anselmo.
Okay, so anything else that happened at Z-Rock that stands out in your career? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more, but what in particular?
Just, being on in New York City, because New York City's the #1 radio market, and we got an affiliate in New York City, an AM station, and we had a niche of people that were not being catered to in the city of New York, Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, etc., Queens, Staten Island, and, we made a big hit in New York. And in radio, you'll have sometimes 2 stations owned by the same person. In New York City, the AM station we were on, it had a sister station on FM, and that was the station where Howard Stern broadcast every morning. So we were running on out of the same floor of the same building as Howard Stern was. And I remember they shipped me to New York one year, and hanging out up at the radio station, I did my show from New York City. And, that was the pinnacle of my radio career, was being in New York, doing my show in New York City, Howard Stern, coming down the elevator with me. And not that I was idolizing Howard Stern. I'm just saying he was the #1 radio person in the world at that point in life. And we at Z-Rock were affiliated with that whole trip going on at the time. And by introducing heavy metal radio 24/7, 365 in New York, it had never been done before, and it was just a great thing. That was probably the biggest highlight of Z-Rock for me, was going to New York, being on in New York, and as I said, Howard Stern's FM station was the sister station to our AM, and Howard worked mornings. In the afternoons on that FM station, that was our sister station, Flo and Eddie were the personalities. I don't know if anybody remembers who Flo and Eddie are, but they are the Turtles. Remember the Turtles?
Yeah.
Top 40 band out of the 60s? Well, the Flo and Eddie from the Turtles were the afternoon personalities in the FM in New York City. So, and I got to meet those guys, and I'd seen them live in concert in the 70s, opening up for Alvin Lee, and 10 years after. And I got to reminisce. I said, man, I saw you guys live as Flo and Eddie in Long Beach opening for Alvin Lee, and they were just, great guys, Flo and Eddie. And that whole experience in New York City was just, it was just priceless.
Well, that's the major market right there, my friend. And so you've had the number 1, number 2 markets under your belt, and then Dallas was it. What are they now, or were back then? You said top 5. Were they 5th or 4th, or?
Yeah, I think they were like 5th.
Okay.
I think the top market is New York.
Yeah.
L.A.'s number 2. I never
Right.
was on in L.A., but Chicago was number 3. But some say Chicago's 2. But because they had Saturday Night Live, and Second City TV was out of Chicago, and Second City, Chicago. So some walks of life will say Chicago's number 2. Some will say LA's number 2.
So you never actually did LA radio. I was under the assumption that you had, but still, okay. Well, you had the number 1.
No, I just grew up in LA.
Okay,
and,
yeah.
I went to radio school, and we had a radio station at our radio school in LA, but it was only heard in the building that we were broadcasting out of. So in that vein, yes, I did broadcast in LA.
All right, good enough. Before I forget, got to mention my current program director, Larry Mack. Does that name ring a bell with Z-Rock and you?
It does ring a bell, but at 65 years old, and that being, back in the 1980s, it's hard to recollect.
Well, he did the Phoenix like the last year or two that they were on the air up there. I think, if I remember correctly, he jumped in that post that I put up. But anyway, just obviously have to name drop him.
Yeah, definitely. And now that you bring up Phoenix, now I connect the name Larry Mack with the Phoenix affiliate.
Okay. Well, there you go. Yeah, he went on to also work for I think the Edge up there, also KUPD. He's been around forever, man. Went out to Vegas for a while. Now he's in Tucson. So good guy. Operations manager actually for Arizona Lotus. So there you go.
Yeah, Phoenix is, my parents live there, and I go back there periodically, but I don't know, there's just something about Phoenix. It's just too hot.
It's damn hot.
I worked in Sedona also.
Oh, Sedona's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it was great working up there. I worked there for about a year at an FM in Sedona. That was a great time for one and all. But as everything in radio, all things come to an end. It always comes to an end in radio at some point.
Well, fortunately, I'm not there yet. I only do 1 shift a week at KLPX, and so far we're still on air. We're still live amidst this pandemic thing, so I'm good with that. And again, I reached the pinnacle of my career. I really did. Afternoons in a major market, that was always my dream. I got it for a while, so I've got that to say. And, man, everything you've accomplished, just far surpasses anything I have, and I can certainly appreciate it. And, again, this is so cool to talk to you because having listened to you back in the day before I got into radio, you were somebody that I thought was, cool on the air. Again, you got to hear – I want to play some of this for you. See if you can hear this. Tell me if you can hear this.
Arizona, get hard. KCRX Globe Phoenix 100.3 Z-Rock.
All right, Madd Maxx Hammer checking in with a healthy overdose of face removal rock and roll on KZRX. All you got to do is grab that volume knob and crank it to 10. Let's get it on. Z-Rock and Barron Cross, Dying Day.
Could you hear that?
Wow, if you could put that on CD and mail it to me, that would be a great thing. Yes, I remember that, and I think that was the night when I said, okay, coming up, we're going to play this, that, and everything else. And then I said, we're going to blow that off and play some Testament and Sabotage, because I think we're playing like Bon Jovi or something crazy like that.
Well, the fact that you just went into Barron Cross, again, another cross, like White Cross, Christian band, on Z-Rock. Kind of interesting.
But are they really Christians? We have to go back to Matthew chapter 7 in your King James Bible, Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23, where Jesus says, "Not everyone that says, 'Lord, Lord,' will go to heaven, for many will come to me in that day, saying, 'Lord, Lord, we were Christians. We went to church on Sunday. We had a heavy metal band that was Christian. We prayed to you. We got water baptized.' But Jesus says to these so-called Christians, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you workers of iniquity.' And they were cast into outer darkness where there was wailing and gnashing of teeth." And that's just a picture of hell. Hell awaits, like Slayer said. I always say, hell awaits. The Slayer album title is the most accurate, non-biblical prophecy of all time. Because hell awaits all of mankind except for the little chosen elect that God has chosen before the foundation of the world. And that's called predestination, a concept that is not grasped by the Christian community. Not only won't they grasp it, they won't take the time to understand it, but it's in the Bible, and they'll say, "I don't believe in it." And it's like, what? It's in your Bible and you don't believe in it? You are a hypocrite. You're not a Christian. You're only a Christian in your own mind. And Jesus talks about these people when he says, "They honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." Jesus will cast you into hell, even though you are a self-proclaimed Christian. And that's the reality of Christianity and these Christian bands. You know, they can call themselves Christians, but he that doeth truth will come to the light, and they are not doing truth. There you go.
Thus saith the Reverend Madd Maxx Hammer, and on a Sunday.
Well, I won't take the title Reverend, because in the Bible it does say in one of the Psalms, the only person or the only entity to be referred to as Reverend is God himself. But, I appreciate what you said, because I am a hard preacher, and, I call down people like Billy Graham. I call down people like the Pope. I call down people like Joel Osteen. I call down people like Fred Price. These are false teachers. John Hagee. The Bible says in Matthew 7, verse 15, Matthew chapter 7, verse 15, "Beware of false preachers. They come in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. So they look the part, they sound the part, but they're phony." And Jesus is the one that's saying it. So you should not be following people like Joel Osteen and John Hagee and what's that truck driver woman that's I can't remember. Joyce Myers. She is the worst. She's a total truck driver looking woman. But she'll scare you away. But, she's on TV and she's praising God. She's going straight to hell. Seriously.
Well, what's funny is...
if you've ever heard of Joyce Myers.
I don't think so. And the funny thing is, you're talking to a PK right now. I am a preacher's kid.
Well, that's probably why you're not into religion, because it was forced on you while you were a kid. And everybody I know that hates religion tells me it was forced on them when they were kids, and once they got to the age where they could make their own decisions, they never went towards God. And that's a problem in this society that we're in, that it's forced religion when kids have to go to church. A mother and father should say to their kids, "We're going to church on Sunday. Do you want to go? If not, we're going to have to get a babysitter, or if they're old enough, you're going to have to stay home alone." Instead of "you're going to church whether you like it or not." That's not the way to bring your kid up, by forcing them, especially considering these churches on the corner are false anyway. Seriously, they are. They preach Jesus loves everybody. Jesus loves you. No, he doesn't. The Bible says before they were born and had done anything, right or wrong, "Jacob have I loved." This is God talking. "Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated." So God doesn't love everybody. It says it in your King James Bible, you hypocrite Christians. And plus Psalm chapter 5, verse 5 says, God hates all workers of iniquity. And that's everybody. Romans chapter 3, there's none good, none that understand, none that seeketh after God. So how can everybody be loved by God? Religion today is just so phony. It's just ridiculous. On the subject of, what we would call religion, when you listen to heavy metal songs, and you get into these heavy metal bands over the years, you can see that they had some connection with religion. Suicidal Tendencies song, Send Me Your Money, is one of the most hard-hitting songs that bashes religion right between the legs and the crotch. That is one of the great songs of all time. And the line in that song, Send Me Your Money, here comes another con hiding behind his collar. His only God is the almighty dollar. It's got to be one of the great lines in the history of music, exposing false teachers, false preachers. That Suicidal Tendencies song, Send Me Your Money. And then if you listen to Marilyn Manson, and this is a remake that Marilyn Manson did, Your Own Personal Jesus. And that is one of the great songs of all time. I think Depeche Mode did it and Johnny Cash did it. But those are just, two great songs. And even, going to Slayer, Hell Awaits, which is, again, it's true, Many will find the broad gate that leads to hell. Few will find the narrow gate that leads to heaven. So hell does await. And Pantera's song, Hellbound, I remember during the Real Steel tour of 2000-2001, Phil would start every show with the song Hellbound, and his screams were exactly what happens in hell, where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth. When Phil wails out in that song Hellbound, I go, wow, that's what it's going to be like in hell, and that's just the way it is. There's no getting away from it. You can have your opinion about it, but the reality is there that hell awaits if you don't repent of your evil ways. Enough said. Talking candidly.
Apparently you are, and I appreciate that.
And truthfully, too. I mean, I'm not lying. Why would I lie about something like that?
Well, no, of course not. Okay, I just found something on YouTube. These air checks, which I can download the video, MP3 it, and get it on a CD eventually or something. I can somehow get this to you, that air check.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, dude, no problem, man. In fact, it looks like a guy, a bro, that works with me at KLPX. He lives on the reservation, one of the reservations here in Arizona. He comes down from the reservation to do his live shift overnights, Jay Bonney. It looks like he's the one that put this up here, so I'll have to give him we got to give him a special shout out, and I'll tell him personally that maybe I'll let him be the one to get it to you. How about that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem, man. What else can you tell us? Any other stories, anything else that you want to get off your mind about Z-Rock, and then we'll wrap things up. And, man, again, I appreciate you gabbing. Just two guys gabbing about Z-Rock. I love it.
Well, I pretty much covered all the bases, and I just appreciate you, bringing it back to the forefront for a small window of time in this, crazy moment that we're dealing with in life. And, maybe if you put it out there, maybe it'll get some people's minds off what's going on and just bring them back to a time when things were just a lot easier and just it was a lot smoother, if you will. But yeah, we covered a lot of bases, and Z-Rock was just a very unique entity within the commercial radio world, and I was just glad that it happened, and it can never be duplicated, and I don't think Z-Rock will ever be done again. Wild Bill Scott's dead. Booby Bondage, nobody knows where she is. It's just, it could never happen again, but it did happen, and it was a great time for one and all.
I was going to mention one other guy. We talked about him the other day, or whenever we talked on the phone first, but Scorchin' Scotty.
Scorchin' Scotty, yeah, he's one of my friends on Facebook. He worked part-time. He worked and fill-in. He did a couple weekend shifts, and when somebody took a vacation or needed a day off, Scorchin' Scotty would fill in. He was another former KNAC Long Beach DJ. KNAC was the first heavy metal station to don the commercial airwaves, but again, it was a low-powered station, and it was limited to Long Beach, California. You could barely get it in Los Angeles. You could get it, but it was, it wasn't good reception. But, KNAC was the forerunner, and Scorchin' Scotty and Wild Bill Scott came from KNAC.
Well, cool. We got a shout out to him then.
Yeah, and Scorchin' Scotty, always had been a good friend of mine.
All right, dude. Well, I got to tell you, it seems like anybody that listened to Z-Rock back in the day, you bring that up today, and they're like, oh, my God, I miss that so much and everything, and it'll always have a special place in our hearts. That's for sure. And, thank you for what you did.
Yeah, thank you for, the opportunity to relive it.